The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1946, which were gradually made public over the following decades, provided valuable insight into the minds of those who wrote the Bible. The technical name for the Dead Sea Scrolls is the Qumran Cave Manuscripts. The caves are located just over a mile from the Dead Sea, in the area now known as the West Bank of Israel. Around 2,000 years ago, a group of conservative Jews called the Essenes lived there, seeking to separate themselves from the outside world. They lived in the desert to purify themselves while they waited for the arrival of the Messiah. John the Baptist may have studied with them. The Gospels say that he lived in the desert until his presence was announced, performing the most famous baptism of all time. The text of the Essenes. The Essenes had accumulated a library of scrolls, and they firmly believed that Yahweh, the God of light, would one day defeat the God of darkness, the devil. Their theology was dualists. Many of the scrolls painted the world in shades of only good and evil, black and white, light and darkness. In the year 70 AD, a little less than 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, Titus and the Roman legions burned Jerusalem to the ground. Their intention was to retaliate against the Jewish ruling class, who refused to honor the Roman emperor in the way the Romans considered proper. The Essenes were not concerned about their death. They were willing to become martyrs for their cause. However, they did not want their library to be destroyed, so they carefully placed the scrolls in clay jars and hid them in caves in the mountains. There, the forgotten texts remained intact until 1946, when a Bedouin boy discovered some of them while searching for lost sheep. That's how these clay jars remained hidden for almost 2,000 years. During that time, part of what they contained decomposed and was lost forever. But the rest is very similar to the material found in the current Bible. The text survived because they were translated over and over again, and many copies were made, but the discrepancies between them are scarce. Although it is commonly believed that what is preached in church or synagogue every weekend came directly from the lips of the Hebrew prophets, that's simply not the case. What is preached comes from a translation made from a translation of a copy of an older copy that came from another translation written long before modern languages appeared. Therefore, it's impossible to know how much could have changed after so many translations, given the amount of time involved. Scribes make mistakes, especially in the centuries before spelling correction. But with the discovery of Qumran, scholars were able to compare modern translations with ancient copies, which, although they were still far from their original versions, were much closer to them. In terms of time, they were more than 2,000 years old, waiting to be compared with what we read today. The most surprising discovery from the recovery of these scrolls is that most of what is found in the modern Old Testament is very accurate. In almost every case, the Dead Sea Scrolls verify that what is read today is not exactly the same, but it is very similar to what was read back then. The edition of the Bible. However, the most interesting material found in the caves are texts that had not been included in the Bible. The committees that participated in the making of the Bible were familiar with them, but they did not consider that some of these materials deserved to be included in the final version. These texts contained fragments that had been outright rejected. In other words, some of the ancient scrolls did not agree with what those who created the Bible believed. So these ancient editors simply kept what they liked and just eliminated the rest. Now, for the first time, there was an opportunity to take a look inside the wastebaskets of the Council of Jamnia, where the Hebrew Bible was first compiled. In a way, that's what the Dead Sea Scrolls are. They offer the opportunity to go back and see what the ancients were reading and what was ultimately discarded. Parts of the modern Old Testament were discovered at Qumran. But there was much more. There were copies of selections from the scrolls that the Jamnia Committee knew about but rejected. They may have destroyed their rejections in the 1st century, but they had no idea that copies of those rejections were buried in the hills outside Jerusalem. So that 2,000 years later, we could find them. But why was certain information removed? The answer could very well be because they contained valuable, dangerous, or forbidden information. For example, that angels can have sexual relations and more things with humans. Here, again, there is a mystery. The Bible says that the reason God caused Noah's flood was that the sons of God, that is, the angels, they saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and married them. The results of these sexual unions were called Nephilim. That's why God wiped out the world. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness had become on the earth. He was saddened for having made man on the earth. And he said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the humanity I have created. The giant Noah, father of modern humanity. Another thing revealed by the Dead Sea Scrolls is that Noah was a Nephilim. The Bible says Noah was forgiven because he found grace in the Lord's eyes. But now, after 2,000 years, here was an old book talking about a certain Lamech, who accused his wife of being one of those women who had an affair with a watcher. A saint, an angel, a son of God, who had seen her as nothing less than one of the beautiful daughters of man. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. He now appears to be a descendant of those who caused God to destroy the earth. First of all, why did Lamech accuse his wife of having an affair with an angel? This could only be because the child looked like a Nephilim, that is, a giant. And who turned out to be that giant child? None other than Noah himself. So was Noah the result of a union between an angel and a human? Did he descend from what we might today call an ancient alien, or an entity from a parallel dimension, or even an angel who fell from God's grace? If so, the implications are astounding. It is said that Noah is the father of all human beings alive today. He and his sons were God's reward. Everyone else was destroyed in the flood. So if Noah is the ancestral father of all humanity, that means of all of us. And he was partly an angel, partly human and partly alien, ancient, or even some kind of spiritual entity. What does that make us? Children of the gods. In other words, people who lived thousands of years ago believe that modern humans descend from something other than terrestrial apes. And these people lived alongside and were presumably as intelligent as the revered people who wrote the Bible, which is so highly regarded today. They all wrote books, but no one has been allowed to read many of them. Because 2,000 years ago, some unknown guardians of the Council of Jamnia decided they were going to hide it because it was false. So they kept what they considered good and burned the rest. But if we are children of the gods or of God, is there any biblical support for that? Yes, Psalm 82 says, "Don't you know that you are gods?" Even Jesus quotes this verse in John 10. It's also repeated in the books of Hebrews and Jude in the New Testament. Jesus, the Son of God himself, refers to his followers as brothers. And if we are brothers of Jesus and the Father of Jesus is God, then what does that make us? These verses, and many more like them, are echoes of the destroyed texts that could have changed the history of religion. I am El Documentalista, and this was Humans Are Gods.